Kim Suho, now Lloyd Frona, stands with his pets and servant in a quiet bushland, watching a massive pile of cash before him, then digs with a shovel to magically turn that ground into a city of future buildings. This is the tale of a civil engineer who completely changed the medieval world. But before we move forward, let's take a step back to a few years ago. You were picked at random by the absolute being to be a character in the novel Knights of Blood and Iron. The message told Kim Soho the moment he opened his eyes, leaving him confused as he realized he had crossed into the fantasy world from the book he read only the night before while lying on the ground. He springs up, shivering with ice in his bones, and his mouth stuck shut from the cold night on the pavement. The system laughs at him, driving him crazy and pushing Lloyd to strike back. Waking up, he realizes he has taken the body of Lloyd, the street-sleeping bodyguard from the novel who actually turned out to be the famous swordsman Javier Azarin, and when Javier sees his face matches the book's illustrations perfectly, he gets annoyed at being called a vagabond before asking back at the War Mansion if Floyd really forgot what happened after getting so drunk he barely made it home to faint in the freezing cold air. Before walking away, Javier promises to tell Lloyd's dad about the fight at the bar, and the main character presses him for details on his family's money troubles. He knew the entire tale because he read the whole book in a single night while sitting in his apartment. He also knows Lloyd's family's fate. The Baron and Baroness were killed by scammers, and vagabond Lloyd died vomiting blood. The protagonist is absolutely furious at how Lloyd has lived until now, because his current life is even worse than his past life in Korea. The next day, his mom asked if he really broke things at the bar last night and told him to apologize to the owner. But even though he felt the owner was in the wrong, he agreed to say sorry anyway. His words are so terrifying that everyone in town, from the guards walking with Hi Lloyd to the little children told to avoid looking at him, trembles in fear because they never thought he would ever apologize to anyone. He wonders why Javier is following him. And when Javier says the Lord sent him to stop accidents, the protagonist realizes he's there to protect the villagers from Lloyd, making him wonder if he should try to improve his reputation first or focus on earning enough money to pay off his family's debts and live a better life. He scans the system for any tricks to use, but all he finds are two useless powers. Javier stands right before the bar asking where Lloyd is going, and when the protagonist admits he got distracted and missed their arrival, Javier remains suspicious and thinks he's lying, even noting that the protagonist seems like a different man now, especially since inside they find a mess Lloyd made the night before. He apologizes, but it only makes the bar owner more suspicious, so he tries acting arrogant to seem confident, yet his excuse fails miserably. Lloyd can't just act like a different person to fix his mistakes, so he uses his bad reputation to trick the bar owner into signing, only for his bodyguard to look at him with deep suspicion while Lloyd starts digging up the yard to prove his new plan is real. "I will make them smile in the end," he says as he starts digging a smooth hole and building a sturdy house with wood from the mansion's warehouse, working hard for a week until he's too weak to continue. But Javier is amazed that he keeps his promise even when exhausted. The protagonist insists there's no time to rest until Javier stops him to show off his incredible speed and skill with an axe, earning a thumbs up and a comparison to modern tech. So the protagonist convinces Javier to help finish the job quickly by promising to reveal his secret, and soon they complete the warm house that makes the owner and his mother feel loved and comfortable, just as the protagonist Evie waits for the perfect moment to appear. He recalls getting RP as Javier's impact grew, which unlocked his ability to train his skills. A sensor scanned him from head to toe, figuring out every skill he had, and when the system said he was smarter than he looked, the angry protagonist just laughed and pointed out that it was obvious, since he'd always been a top student who earned scholarships. With the skills he already knew, he learned how to take basic measurements and make simple designs. Even though he doesn't quite understand what they mean, he buys both, activating basic measurement, which makes his eyes glow green, instantly letting him see the exact size of the land just by looking outside. He uses his design skill to conjure a floating screen in front of him, letting him sketch models way faster than he ever could on paper. Even though the work ahead will be much easier, he still faces a problem because he doesn't have enough hands to get the job done, so he really wants to borrow a backhoe to help out. The system says he can summon one right now, and that news makes him super excited. But there's a catch. Summoning a random fantasy creature costs 50 RP, and he only has one of those points left. That's a win-win, because if his fantasy creatures come alive, they'll likely prove far more useful than clunky heavy machines. The lonely sharks are threatening the Baron that if he can't pay, they'll seize his wife and sell her. Just then, the hero shows up and yells, "Is that all your manners, you loan sharks?" They question why a child was bothering their talk. Yet before kicking him out, the protagonist demanded their invitation letter, reminding them that the kingdom's noble law states anyone entering a noble's home without one is breaking the law and committing a crime. The lonely sharks claim they've never heard of this law, but but he insists they check it out together while calling Javier. The moment he steps into the room, the hero shouts for the intruder's arms to be cut off. The lonely sharks ask if he's lost his mind and if he really intends to settle this in court. He explains that he asked them to check together so he can see which side the court will support. When Javier pulls his sword, the two lonely sharks get scared and swim away, promising they'll regret this. His father asks him in fear that this won't fix things until Lloyd slams a bag of cash onto the table. He says this first payment is a huge amount for this month. His dad worries Javier is squeezing cash out of people, but Javier assures him he's just watching the young master stick to his promise. Seeing the trust Javier places in his son, he decides to trust him this time. In the hallways, Javier asks how the protagonist knows the law since he thought he was ignorant, but the angry protagonist snaps that he just found out. In fact, he discovered it hidden in the novel after the couple had passed away. The solitary shark wanted to dig up the bodies and sell them. Right then, Javier spoke on the law and cut off the two heads, sure the story would pay off, but one thing stood out. He gained 6 RP because his father finally trusted him. He slips away to a quiet spot far from anyone else and hits the spin button, letting fate decide where he'll end up. Several gears begin to hover in the air and make a magic circle, but it turns out much smaller than he had hoped. From this circle, a tiny mouse scurries out and tumbles to the ground. When the hero looks at that tiny mouse, he thinks his summoning failed and makes the poor little creature cry. It manages to speak up, proving it hasn't failed and can still do lots of things. When the protagonist asks what it can do, it spits out a drool-covered manual. And though it looks gross, they find that feeding it sunflower seeds can change their size, with red seeds making them giant for 12 hours and blue ones shrinking them down. He wonders if his digging hamster could grow to human size and become a powerful helper. And when he feeds it, the little creature starts glowing and bursting with growth. It grows so fast and big that it smacks the hero, tossing him backward. The hamster, once tiny enough to fit in his hand, has now grown to the size of a 10-story building, capable of digging through the earth instantly, hardening the ground with a simple roll, and hoarding items in its mouth. While the protagonist is thrilled that his heavy machinery problem is solved, he knows he can't just reveal these giant creatures to the public without raising suspicion. So he keeps a book handy and claims to be a summoning genius instead. The next day, Lloyd leads the 30 workers in a cheer for safety first, but they remain unmotivated and lazy despite being paid, leaving the protagonist puzzled by the Baron's decision to keep them around rather than firing them, which actually saves him money since he doesn't have to spend extra trying to get them to work. He gives a speech pointing to a pile of dirt he claims he spent the night digging, which he actually scooped up in just 30 minutes thanks to Palm. Yet the team Lloyd questions the man's actions, refusing to believe he'd let his soldiers do dirty work just because the Lord approved it, which stresses the man out until he suddenly throws a punch, leaving everyone shocked and a guard wondering if he really tried to ruin his knight's reputation. Pretending not to hear, the protagonist immediately challenges his opponent to a duel, then heads back to the mansion where Javier doubts his chances against a powerful sword master, only for the protagonist to mockingly ask for lessons after picking his nose, leading Javier to refuse unless the protagonist can first cure his strange insomnia by talking him to sleep just like a teacher does in class. Now that he has done his part, all the sword tricks are his, and the next day, arrested Javier is ready to strike while his first blow is already blocked. His dad and Javier are amazed that he didn't just get lucky once, but kept blocking every attack that followed. Javier moves with such incredible speed and skill that it feels like a sword technique perfected over many years. Actually, it's called modern combat, and Bea charges something for every Korean man who learns in the army. He wasn't just randomly grabbing a shovel to fight. He had prepared everything perfectly, tuning up his tool, mastering basic sword moves, and even syncing his power to dig for this battle. He got this special power because Javier and his parents helped him. Then Newman proves exactly why he earns the title of Baron's Knight. He pumps his mana heart to speed up the power flowing through him. He is really ready to strike this time, moving at lightning speed right toward the hero. Even Javier admits that no regular person can stop an attack from someone with a mana heart. But of course, he wasn't just any normal person, and even though he swung his sword with everything he had to kill, the hero still managed to stop the blade right in its tracks. Newman felt dizzy and weak, like his body had suddenly gone limp. This was the fourth power he had prepared, AZ Rant's secret technique, the one that made Javier the strongest hero in the story. He notices his magic vanishing instantly, so he draws his sword to defend, but the protagonist seizes that split second to strike him right in the face. The blow was so hard he felt a tooth shoot out and was immediately slammed by another attack. Everyone around looks shocked because Lloyd actually won. Even when his father stops the fight, Lloyd's rage won't die down. He keeps hitting the man down on the ground, but his father yells at him to stop ruining the knight's good name while soldiers rush in to end the fight. Last night, the family chatted about how he's lost control. Lai claims he's calm and begs the soldiers to let him go, only to get hit again, but Javier, watching closely, sees that Lai strikes him in spots that won't hurt and knows it's all an act because his face shows he expected it. 15 days before their fight, the protagonist showed up to ask for help learning the mental trick called Azrin. Javier freezes in shock because this move is his own secret, and he was sure no one else knew how to use it. He confirms that this technique can pull mana from the air and turn it into his own. Javier asks how I know the trick, and I shamelessly lie, telling him I must have talked about it in my sleep. Javier says the technique is too unfinished to teach, but the protagonist insists they can finish it by first gathering outside mana and pouring it into their mana heart, letting it reject the raw energy before moving it around the core to mix it safely. Javier was convinced it could work and demanded to know how the protagonist came up with it, but the protagonist just bragged that he simply imagined it would succeed. That same day, Javier finally mastered the technique he had struggled with for ages, and on his very first try, he created 3 circles, while Lloyd admitted he didn't want a mana heart and only wished to learn how to absorb whatever he could touch. Since Javier learned this new power, he figured he could beat Newman, and so he did. His father scolds him for boasting about being a knight, but he points out the letters hidden under the tablecloth that reveal everything needed to become one, including secrets about the Baron's habits and how to make fake papers to secure his future. Newman didn't know how he found the hidden items in the wall until the book told him, so he sent his hamster to get them. He notices his father looks totally shocked, and since the protagonist knows no words like kind or friendly, he suggests throwing fierce rats on the man's head, kicking him off the property, or demoting him to a normal knight so he can think about his bad deeds. People are confused why he wants to throw rats at Newman, since a small rat can't hurt him, but his father and others think it's a sensible and dangerous idea, so the father agrees, asks if Newman objects, and Newman thanks them for their mercy while questioning if kindness will make an evildoer reflect or just try to take advantage of it. Then the protagonist smiles at the rat eating a sunflower seed before throwing it up so it grows huge and crushes Newman, ending his rule, and the next day. A hamster digs a path through the city while Javier asks what he's doing, and Lloyd replies he's building a road like the ancient Appian way to connect the Baron's house to the coast. But Javier is suspicious and asks how Lloyd suddenly learned all this. So the protagonist explains that seeing this change, he knew Lloyd would be the kind to draw his sword and claim he studied secretly while drinking, then retorts that if Lloyd can use magic so well at 20, Javier fell silent since he couldn't argue. So the protagonist grabbed the chance to run away and headed to Knight Bayer, telling him to handle everything while he was gone, even though Javier insisted on coming along to guard the young master, which seemed like common sense to the protagonist, before they set off for a faraway place to collect unpaid debts. In a quiet corner of the Renier estate, the stressed scammer from Thor to Real Estate admits he's lost a fortune, only for his bodyguard to shrug it off as normal gambling luck and warn that if the cash doesn't show up soon, he'll have to pack and leave. As the scammer panics and tries to escape with his guard, the hero Lloyd Frona bursts in, leaving the man so shocked he can't move while the pair leaps from the window only to land straight into a waiting trap in the alley. Javier tells the bodyguard to hand over the swindler and go, warning that refusal will make him an accomplice. But the tough guard ignores him and casts a spell while the tied-up thief sits there, leading Javier to claim their stash of cash will cover interest for months, only for the hero to correct him by saying he'll spend it all on hiring more soldiers since 30 aren't enough. A few days later, we watch the hero hiring staff until the line stretches out for many meters. He asks Javier if people truly hate him, knowing they do, but realizing that his sharp decision to sell the Dan doll cheaply and punish the traitor has made them see him as both trustworthy and capable. The man before him asks where to sign the contract, but first he thanks him, noting that his son used to freeze in winter, yet now he doesn't have to worry about the cold thanks to him. The protagonist feels ashamed because he's just giving in to his greed. The man keeps telling us that folks from another town are eager to buy the Undulls. The hero knew this would happen because he hadn't spent his time building the Undull in vain. Now he'll sneak up the price by calling it travel costs, and keep all the money for himself. High up in the mountains, Lloyd warns Javier that the Undull will soon strip this peak bare, forcing him to cancel the Upon Way project and turn instead to selling the coal found at the road's end for a high price. If the inn wins over the crowd, no other nation will be able to say no. The townsfolk will get a small discount, and though Lloyd wonders if that's fair, he knows without it he can't pay off his family's debts. Javier agrees it's risky since the mine already collapsed, but he's confident he can succeed with today's advanced tools and the shield method. Javier is clueless about this shield thing, but promises to keep watching, even though this new young master is completely different and the hero who knows the story still doesn't understand everything. because hidden dangers lie ahead and thousands of creatures are waiting inside the cave to come out. Lloyd clasps his hands, waves his magic up, and suddenly a tall apartment building rises into the sky. A giant building suddenly drops from the sky right behind him. He'd love to cast a grand spell, but his only magic is a quick tap on his finger to make his design fly faster. Feeling exhausted from the endless delay, he decides he needs 100 undead workers who won't ask for a dime. Because of the trouble with Newman, he earned 639 reputation points thanks to the good feelings of the people. He turned his simple design and measuring know-how into intermediate skills, unlocking a host of new tools to help him build even better things. Standing at the mine's dark mouth, he thinks back on exactly how he was told to dig. By using his intermediate measurement skill to scan 5 meters ahead, he could spot the safest route, but the real challenge is finding a way to break through and get in fast. Humans will move too slow and get tired easily. Padong is fed up with this road project. He has no choice but to reach into the air and pull out a brand new species from thin air. He flicks the tiny portal switch again, it makes a loud noise, and a little snake pops right out. Seeing this adorable snake, who looks useless on the outside, he recalls that Padong was just like this too. He asked if the plant grows large when fed sunflower seeds. He challenges her to show off what she can do. Weeks later, he realizes she is far more helpful than he ever expected. She eats the earth right in front of the shield, then Javier waits to strike the moment she finishes digesting. She spits out steel beams at Javier, then slices up to build the frame, holding up the whole landscape. Javier wonders why he's chopping up the giant snake's poop, while the leader ignores his worry and shouts for everyone to push the iron shield and keep moving. Even with the oxygen tubes keeping him from fainting, he still feels a little bit dizzy. Seeing Javert look tired, Javert suggests he rest with the team, but the protagonist insists he must stay and run the site as the manager. In Korea, the bosses were the kind of people who never even showed up at the work site. He despised those people and swore he would never be like them. So he puts his power to use and spots a glowing creature ahead. He lifts everyone's spirits by saying they're almost there, thanks to the little snake for making their journey 10 times faster, but as the hero explains they'll need to dismantle the shields to make room for the coal, a strange noise from the ground sends them into alarm. The hero uses his power to spot a new hole forming, which quickly grows until a giant ant crawls out. Javier quickly sliced off its antenna and then smashed its head with a shovel. The monster's sudden show took him by surprise since it wasn't in the book, but he knew there was no time to relax because an ant never walks alone. As thousands more swarmed in, he rushed everyone outside, while Javier stood his ground, hacking away at the attackers to save them. If you find an ant colony, you might discover anywhere from 200 to 1,000 monsters hiding there. Javier is panting hard because he can't carry them all, and since the path is so stable it won't fall without dynamite, he slaps Lloyd to snap him out of the panic. When someone keeps thinking hard for a solution, they often come up with another brilliant idea. He tells Javier they'll charge straight into the tunnel even though it seems crazy, but since they have to, they move forward. Back at the mansion, the Baron learns that monsters have taken over the mine and left his son and Javier behind to fight them. He slams on his armor and orders everyone to rush to the mine, while Javier keeps fighting the ants and wonders how much more they have to face. The pair is trapped in a sea of ants, and the hero knows Javier is about to give up. He uses his special power to find a pocket of methane gas deep underground, knowing that if they can bring it to the surface, they can trigger a massive explosion to wipe out the ants, so he digs frantically while Javier stands guard to keep him safe. Everything looks fine until they both hear a huge scream. The Ant Queen has arrived, and just seeing her giant size makes Javier realize he can't even face her. But with no other option, he pushes past his limits to defend and strike back against the Queen's attack. As Javier fights her, the protagonist keeps digging until he finally finds the gas. He shouts for Javier to sprint to the exit while he grabs a burning torch, and they dash through a tunnel choked with dead bodies until they're far enough away for him to toss the flaming torch into the gas outlet. The Ant Queen lunges at them, but a huge gas explosion blasts her and every other ant in the cave. People outside can hear the noise and feel the deep rumble coming from inside the cave. The Baron fears for his son and rushes toward the cave, but his bodyguard holds him back. 2 people survive the blast, but Javier and the snake are both out cold. To make things worse, the entrance is blocked, and they know they'll run out of air soon. The hero looks right through the wall with his special power. He has no choice but to start digging. Javier, who kept a piece of his mind, watched him struggle to get them free, and in doing so, they grew closer. Realizing he had nothing left to lose, he demanded the system boost his powers. The system dives deep into his abilities, blending them all together to forge the powerful core technique known as Azurin. As he created the ability, a surge of raw power flooded his body, letting him feel the mana swirling around where his core should be, even though he didn't possess one. His mana surged to 120%, giving him plenty of resources to keep grinding his technique until it hit level 10, and even though nothing seemed wrong, he still chose to sweep the mine for safety. Javier asks why he has to do these dangerous jobs himself instead of sending a worker, but the main character calls him an idiot and explains that he needs to take the risks personally so no one will talk, even if it costs a lot of money. They reach the end of the tunnel, but Javier orders them to turn around while the protagonist, having seen something strange through his power, hesitates. He begins digging to check for unhatched eggs, but instead finds an orc trapped with other animals, likely stored up to be eaten later. Javier claims he looks scary and is ready to handle things himself, but the hero stops him in his tracks. Lloyd checks if his friend is dead, but Javier warns that ants only paralyze their next meal, so the MC grins wickedly, thrilled by this incredible reward. Back at the mansion, the orc named Heroes is already awake, promising that he will never forget how you saved him. Heroes, the son of the orc tribe leader, promises to do whatever Lloyd asks just for saving his life. That was exactly why he chose to help the Green One. Prota begged for 120 orcs to work the mine, but the warriors refused because they only obey other warriors. And since young Lloyd isn't a warrior, he couldn't command them. Plus the tribe rules say you must bring back a monster ant's head before you can even become an adult. Her Rose stumbled in the tunnel and lost her ability to move, but our MC wouldn't let her off that easy. First, he congratulates him on finally growing up to be an adult orc. The hero's crestfallen hero says he couldn't catch the monster ant. So the protagonist replies that they caught the Ant Queen together by showing her head pinned to the wall. The Hulk admits he doesn't recall catching such a giant ant, but the liar claims it was shocking because the Queen was shaking with fear when he stepped into the tunnel. As Javier nods along to the orc's terrible lie, thinking they've both captured the Queen and are now top warriors, Lloyd points out the 120 workers again, only for the orc to agree he will hire them all. A week later, after a long journey to the Steel Sand Tribe village, the protagonist discovers the orc leader has rejected his request and, stunned, demands to know why. The orc chief shouts that they must hunt every day because if they don't eat meat right away, they'll lose their muscle strength. Javier claims these orcs are total bodybuilding maniacs, so talking them out of it will be impossible. The protagonist wonders if they can save the meat so they don't have to hunt for over 3 days, and he assures them he knows how to keep it fresh even after several days. Let's rewind a bit to remember the day they first stepped into the village. After so many days apart, the father and son were so overcome with emotion when they finally saw each other again. They sprint toward one another and wrapped themselves in a warm, tight hug. The hug was so powerful it whipped up a gust of wind. Lloyd joked that anyone caught in between would be turned into meat, and while our mercenary saw a chance to boost productivity with 120 workers, there was one other thing that truly caught his eye. When heroes celebrated by bringing back the Ant Queen's head, the orcs were lifting huge gold weights to do squats. Lloyd is stunned, wondering where they could have possibly found them, as if they'd just snatched them right off the shelf. So, he strikes a deal with the orc chieftain to get both the workers and the treasure. Javier reads the contract, sees they're building a stone-cold storage warehouse, and since he doesn't know what that is, he asks Lloyd. The royal family keeps their food fresh by using magic to turn it into ice. They're going to do the same thing, but instead of magic, they need to find a tough stone called granite that is so strong it will be hard to pull out. Normally you'd use dynamite to pull out the stones, but right there standing next to him is a human named Dynamo, and the look on Javier's face says he knows he's about to use that hero again in a major moment of the story. The city of Namum, where the whole population is stuck behind a magic wall, and Javier has to save thousands of refugees trapped inside. Right now, Javier is a sword master with 4 cores swirling around his mana heart, and in this moment of despair, he accidentally discovered a powerful new move called Collision Explosion, that shattered the magic barrier and became his signature technique. Lloyd explains how Javier can use it again, and when Javier asks how he knows, Lloyd admits he just imagined it, though his real reason for teaching it was to use Javier, who will now protect his heart with 1 core while moving the other 3. Javier blasts a rock with such force that his clothes rip and his hair flies, and though he's angry that Lloyd didn't warn him, Lloyd apologizes anyway because the idea works perfectly. It's now Javier's turn to work, and while he talks about his knight's honor and being used for construction, Lloyd realizes this is just Javier's way of showing gratitude. With the granite being carried by Pong and the orcs working 5 times faster thanks to this help, the only thing left the protagonist insists they check right away, but Javier stops him, warning that if this is a mission, he should go alone since the accident could be deadly, Yet the protagonist reminds him he is in charge of the workers' safety. After finding one of his custom gloves in the mountains, Javier senses a faint, strange energy flowing toward the canyon and recalls a terrifying detail from the book, forcing them to rush forward. They follow clues from the missing group to Rant's dungeon, the hideout of the Black Mage Ripon that Javier has hunted since the start, sparking the protagonist's anger that someone dared to harm his workers. Javier dives into the cave first and steps on a trap, but the protagonist saves him, leading the knight to question his bravery since he knew a trap was there from reading about Javier getting hurt in the book before. Javier, who never gets tricked twice, spots the hidden traps Lloyd warned him about by sensing the strange mana and leads the group to the cave's back exit, while the swordsman ignores the mysterious energy he feels and focuses entirely on saving the workers. Deep inside the dark cave, a black mage feels intruders arriving to rescue the kidnapped workers after triggering a trap, so he finishes his final preparations and walks up to the heavy iron door, only to find himself offering up all his magical items as a desperate trade for freedom. Lloyd is thrilled to claim everything for himself, while Javier rushes to save the soldiers. As the hero questions the black mage about his plans for the kidnapped soldiers, the dark wizard is secretly studying a spell to raise his dead wife and son from the grave. While working as a mage for the Lord, he planned to sneak out with his family and escape after the Lord suddenly tried to take them away. Lloyd stops his tale right in the middle. He isn't in the mood to listen to a word of it. The protagonist questions the black mage, asking if he truly believes saving his wife and daughter after killing hundreds of people is the right thing to do. Because he only cared about his own wish, he broke the happy lives of many other families. Only after that final act do we know he was a serial killer. As Lloyd turns away to grab his magical tools later, he warns him never to hurt anyone again. The black mage is so moved by his kindness that he keeps thanking him over and over for letting him live. Inside the book, Javier lets the black mage go and kicks him out of the lab. The repellent turned hundreds into a strange, evil villain who fought Javier many times even after knowing he could not be saved, but Lloyd still looked away from the start, and Javier quickly ended the black mage's life by cutting off his head. In a past life before he became Lloyd, he once met a man who hurt him for no reason at all. Every day, the supervisor treated him this way, and the MC kept apologizing because he believed kindness would bring kindness back, only to have him lower his head and become easy prey for their mistreatment. One day, his rage took over and he could no longer hold back. That day, the hero finally gave that scoundrel the beating he deserved. As he was struck and thought he was doomed, the outcome turned out to be the opposite. The man began to be terrified of him and stayed far away. On that day, he finally saw that sometimes the only way to stop violence is to use violence. Evildoers must be punished just as much as their bad deeds deserve. Back at the orc village, he sees his men are so exhausted they could drop dead right then and there. Lloyd tells the worker to hand over his backpack, and when the worker hesitates, Lloyd explains that if he passes out, someone will have to carry both him and his bag. In truth, the young master grabs every worker's backpack, ties them all together, and warns that anyone who complains will lose their bonus. Javier isn't sure if he's doing this just for the backpacks, but it doesn't matter because all the soldiers see Lloyd as a trustworthy leader who they can follow. The system keeps asking if he finds this work rewarding, but for him, the only thing that matters is getting paid. When they reached the orc village, the stone storage was already finished. Inside, the young orc notices it's a bit colder than out there, but not quite cold enough to spoil the meat. Lloyd says the job isn't done yet, because they don't have enough ice to cool the place down. Hose worries how he'll get ice since their living space is so hot. Lloyd smiles and says he'll get it no matter what, but the orc is still suspicious, thinking Lloyd brought a trickster to the village. So the young Hulk decides to trust him, believing his savior can't be evil. As the orc walks away, Javier wonders how they'll get ice, but even the main character has no idea. Javier questions him and signs the contract without a plan, but Lloyd explains that to be successful, you have to make the impossible happen. Late at night, the hero sits on cold rocks, deep in thought about how to turn water into ice. First, he built molds and had his pets fill them with water, but he still didn't know how to turn it into ice. In this world, ice mages exist, but he doesn't truly understand how their magic works. He understands that magic is simply the freedom to command mana by reshaping it in the air around him. There are many different kinds of mana out there. If he manages to collect just one kind and focus on it, he might unlock what people call magic. Lloyd tells his pets to pack the giant ice molds. Even without free control over mana, he can mimic it by placing his hand in the water and using the Azuran core technique to pull out only the warm energy while leaving the cold behind. On his first try, he does the opposite and grabs only the cold energy. Javier thought he was just being reckless, but it turns out the young master is figuring it out and proudly succeeds a few days later. The orc chief and his son shiver together as the cooling room grows cold. A massive wall of ice, built from many smaller chunks stuck together, is what makes everything so cold. Now that they're both finally happy, they can stop hunting every day and wasting their precious protein. Lloyd gazes at Javier with the sharp eyes of a businessman, and the swordsman nods in agreement, admitting Lloyd was right all along. The orc lord claims he owes Lloyd everything after Lloyd brought 120 workers, but the chief reminds him that a contract isn't enough to earn trust, so now the whole Steel Sand tribe declares Lloyd Frana's family as blood brothers. As a celebration, every orc strikes the Arnold pose, and from that moment on, anyone friendly to the Fra family is welcomed by the whole tribe while their enemies become enemies of all. The hero, happy to return the favor, flexed his few muscles. After a week in the city, the people's reaction was exactly the wild show they had been waiting for. It was clear they were terrified when 120 huge, muscle-bound orcs marched into the city. Lloyd is worried that maybe he should have made a formal announcement to calm the crowd. It turns out that plan wouldn't work either, because even his parents knew the orcs were coming, and they were just as terrified. Alongside the rewards from the orc village, the tale of how he rescued the workers from the Dark Mage spread far and wide, bringing his point total all the way to 911. The Baron promised to find rich merchants who would buy the orc's gear. Now we just have to figure out how to use the dark magic tools. Lloyd was reading a book when he found something shocking, so he ran straight to the mine. There he hunts down the man who owed money to tell him some exciting news, because even though the contract's silly promise to work for 520 years was just a joke since no one could live that long, he's finally found a magic spell that can turn a person into a ghost and control them, so he won't have to worry about the contract anymore. This means he'll get to work for the next 520 years, and the protagonist asks why he's the only one happy, telling him to smile. The defaulter forces a smile, while secretly crying from the depths of despair. His actions were so cruel that even the King of Hell is enchanted by his personality. He heads back to the mansion to talk things over with the Baron in person. He searched everywhere for him, but a maid told him the Baron had just visited a lone shark. Right then, the Lord's face shifts, and it's clear he's got something in store for them. Inside the meeting room, the loan sharks are trying to talk the Baron into giving up the mine in return for paying just 10% of the original debt. While he sits quietly lost in thought, the protagonist taps on the door and asks to come inside. This time, Lloyd came over all friendly and ready to chat with him. They quickly pull out the contract, proving he can never kick them out of the house again. But he keeps up his performance and modestly offers a suggestion. They say no, but Lloyd just won't stop talking, and it's starting to really annoy them. Lloyd keeps talking and admits that if he doesn't make his suggestions, he'll end up feeling a bit annoyed. Just then, a young orc named Fury pops up behind him to ask who made his brother so angry. The two lonely sharks are scared of the orc, but Lloyd tells them not to worry since they will agree to his plan. Once the meeting ended, the two lone sharks bolted out of the mansion. Lloyd admits to his dad that he wants the Deb gone, but since that's a crime, their father hits Lloyd's face so hard with it that it lands with a surprising thud, revealing a hippopotamus-shaped creature that makes the three pets celebrate by playing together. With hope in his heart, the protagonist asks him to show the way. Just like the others, Hippo spits out a card, so Lloyd picks it up without thinking and reads that even with sunflower seeds, the plant won't grow. Since Hippo won't grow like the others and can't help with the mission, Lloyd decides to ignore it, which upsets his other pets until they step in to comfort the new friend. The hero tries to say he's not fit for the job, but the pets stop working until he agrees to honor their values. Lloyd decides to give it a try and asks if it can do anything. The tiny hippo shows off its one gulp power, letting it chug a huge amount of water in a single swallow, though it can only take in as much as its tummy can hold. Lloyd thought for a moment that this was the perfect power for the job, but once again, he ended up disappointed. Hippo shows off its skills by diving right into the lake to take a big drink of water. The hero starts to wonder if he's going crazy because Hippo looks like he's growing right before his eyes. It starts drinking the whole lake until Lloyd is shocked to see it shrink into a dry swamp in just a few seconds. The hippo looks totally happy after drinking so much water, leaving the protagonist completely amazed at how much the animal managed to gulp down in just a few seconds. The other two pets stare at their master with a smug "I told you so" look, while Lloyd asks the system if getting exactly the magical beast he needs is really just random, only for the system to shrug and say he's just lucky. Hippo asks if it can keep drinking more. The architect who was reborn told him to keep drinking until he couldn't hold another drop, because the building of the Matrix world begins tomorrow. The next day, the workers stare in awe at Hippo's huge size as he joins the first task, gulping down massive amounts of water and spitting it back into the river over and over until the area is completely dry. The workers blast the herbs and roots out of the soil with a mana explosion, then dig holes, plant bamboo, and use Padon to squeeze all the water out of the deep earth. The hippo takes a bamboo shoot and uses it like a straw. Only after putting all that together with his simulation power, they finally build a dam. With all that work done, and the first sector finally finished, Lloyd shouts that they're going to have a huge party to cheer up everyone who helped. After a few days, even Javier is amazed that they turned wasteland into farmland, though he wonders when a swordsman started working in construction, so Lloyd arrives shouting his name. He tells Javier to scatter seeds along the path to fight off the bugs. Once a mighty warrior wielding a great sword, he now tends the fields as a humble farmer. Next time, he'll be sure to say no to the young master's requests. Right then, the Baron and Baroness walked in to see that amazing sight, and everyone must feel the same way, because what they were watching was truly a miracle. As the villagers began to treat the hero with respect, he started gathering even more RPS. Javier is also happy, caring for his plants with the same love he would give his own daughters. Lloyd says the only thing left to finish everything is the water wheel, a device to stop the swamp from flooding again. Suddenly, the sound of galloping hooves begins to echo toward them. A whole troop of horsemen is charging straight at them. Lloyd asked who those men were, and Javier told him that was Viscount Racona, the man who owns the northern part of the swamp. As soon as they arrive, the hero steps up and claims he's the one who built it. One of the riders on horseback shouts that this is the Viscount's territory and orders them to turn back right now. The Mars Swamp hasn't seen a single visitor in hundreds of years. To the north lies the Viscount Lona's land, while to the south belongs the Frona. But they boldly claimed the land as theirs from the very beginning, hoping to grab this rich, fertile soil without lifting a finger. It's clear they insist on giving up the land because part of that swamp belongs to them, and Lloyd has been asking the Viscount if he truly means their property was taken. The man on the horse tried to speak, but the protagonist cut him off by saying that this talk was only for nobles. The man's anger rises as the farmers challenge the young master's choices. Lloyd steps forward and tells everyone he is the oldest son of the Frona family. Viscom calls his own actions indecent and pleads to summon Baron Frona. BMC acts like he didn't hear a thing and scratches his ear. When asked what he heard, he said the only sound was a dung fly buzzing. The Viscount tries to spot a fly, but his guard warns him that the young man is actually talking about him. Lloyd explains law number 321, the special rule for growing crops in the wasteland. If a wasteland sits empty for 100 years with no one living there or farming it, anyone can claim it as their own, provided the land has produced at least one specific harvest. Suddenly, Javier recalls an old talk with Lloyd where he mentioned that those seeds are meant to clear the land of pests. The protagonist cheers the Viscount for seeing the swamp's first ever harvest, knowing he was ready, but the Viscount feels tricked. D. Lloyd kindly hands a cabbage over as a gift and tells the cavalry to leave his land or face being called trespassers. As everyone walks away and Javier feels the sting of disappointment, he asks if there was a prophecy that these people would show up. Of course, this isn't the first time our hero has faced people trying to steal the work of others. The farmers cheered with joy, grateful that the young master had kept their land safe. He keeps acting like a mercenary who only cares about cash and tells everyone to get back to work. Deep in the dark, the main character sits and watches the fields get pounded by a massive storm. As summer fades away, autumn steps in with its own rain. Even after running that simulation many times, he must keep his guard up and watch until the very end, because by morning the rain will stop and the worry will fade with it. Thanks to his brilliant invention, the land stayed dry instead of turning into a swamp, and he even earned achievement points from the system. With the first task finished, he's ready to move on to the next one. Meanwhile, in Lona's land, he could easily get mad at what was happening. If they keep planting for 2 more years, the swamp will finally be theirs, and that golden land will soon be full of hatching eggs. Even his tummy is churning from having to say goodbye to his precious land. He refuses to let this rich land go and orders his boss to call the head of the dye workshop. A few days later, Lloyd jolts awake from his bed, clutching his head in pain. Maybe those endless days without sleep have finally caught up with me. Even then, he can't just lie there because there is so much work left to do. The trouble deepens when Javier wakes up acting strange with the same bad headache, convincing the main character that this isn't just a coincidence, but a trap set by someone on purpose. It wasn't just the two of them who felt the change. The maid Emily, Mr. Alop, the boy who watched the cows, and even the cows themselves were all touched by it. In the end, everyone in the village, people and animals both, feels the impact. The creatures with the sharpest instincts turned away from the water, so the protagonist figured it must be poisoned. Lloyd thought his knowledge was his biggest power, but after seeing what the ants did, he finally learned that not everything is exactly what it looks like. Waiting for the Viscount to move, we dug into his lands and found his money comes from a dye technology that uses Leona fruit. The fruit can be deadly to people, and because Ricona was so jealous and greedy, he made sure to ruin the village's water supply. Inside the Grand Mansion, Baron Frona stares in shock as someone makes a bold offer. The Viscount's subordinate wants half the wetlands and insists on building a giant Roman aqueduct across a huge valley using blasted limestone, which accidentally ends up in the river and turns the workshop's clothes brown, prompting the Viscount to angrily ask why this has anything to do with painting. Ricona promises to drag them to court, and the hero warns that it will take at least 2 years, leaving them to wonder if anyone will still remember their products by then. The Viscount is absolutely stunned, terrified that his family fortune might vanish. Lloyd says goodbye after calming the man's fears, but just as he turns to leave, the Viscount blocks his path and vows to make his life a living nightmare. Outside, Javier asks himself what Lloyd really wants. All he did was push that man's buttons, yet this guy is deadly because of his powerful friends in the capital, so the MC tells him to hold still and see who has more to lose. A month later, the Viscount drops to his knees and begs for help to save his paint shop. Lloyd sneered with attitude and asked if 2 of his wealthy friends had told him he couldn't win the case. The Viscount apologizes with a heavy heart, but the protagonist cares nothing for his pride or his words. He just wants the Viscount to put his name on the paper. Once he signs the paper, water will be flowing to his workshop within a week. When he sees the huge price for water, the Viscount is shocked and asks why anyone would sell something as basic as water. But the protagonist reminds him that water isn't free. So the Viscount and even his scared father are forced to sign a never-ending contract that will drain the Viscount's money forever, turning the protagonist in the Viscount's eyes into a devil, while he cynically calls the Viscount generous. Javier told the Baron not to worry because he would keep a close eye on him, and the Baron admitted that while the Viscount's threat once scared him so much he thought about giving up the lance. Seeing his son and the people's effort gave him the courage he needed, even though the Baron called himself an indecisive lord. Javier insisted his father was actually kind and welcoming. Although he liked what his men said, he knew he still wasn't a great lord like Lloyd because Lloyd stood by his money-driven rules with certainty. Yet Javier began to wonder if having only money as a guiding principle was actually such a bad thing after all. The Baron told Javier he must now protect him as the heir to the land, and though Javier accepted this duty, he knew he could never quite match the warmth of his past friendship with Lloyd, even after Lloyd had miraculously saved their family. Remembering how the young orphan asked to be a knight so he could guard the Baron and survived a deadly winter alone, the Baron carved a wooden sword to honor him, only for a mocking young Lloyd to shatter the gift and question how an orphan could ever become a knight. Javier returned to his room, taking off his coat while looking at the broken sword he had kept for so many years. Sure that he could never like Lloyd, the MC started attending to his recurring client, joking that Javier couldn't live without him anymore. To help him sleep, Professor Myram began reciting the discharge compression method, almost falling asleep. Javier was sure he should hate him, but it's as if he had transformed into a completely different person. It's hard to admit, but he had become a decent person. In the middle of the night, while both were